Hello everyone, this is your friend Shinobi Nexus 2.0 and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto had to deal with Mei, Hinata, Sakura, Ino, and all the Kunoichi of the Leaf Part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. Mei Terumi, the beautiful and powerful Mizukage of the village hidden in the mist, was on her way to the village hidden in the leaves for a diplomatic mission. She was accompanied as usual by her main advisor Ao, and her bodyguard Chojuro. The mission, which was to have a personal meeting with Tsunade, the Hokage, was really just a front. Her true goal in heading to the allied village was to find herself a young shinobi to marry. The biggest problem in the relatively young Misusage's life, geez, she was only 33, she always told her mother, was that she was still single. It wasn't that she was unattractive. In fact, she liked to think of herself as quite stunning. Her problem was that being the leader of her village took up a lot of time and most of the men she interacted with were quite intimidated by her. It's not like she was going to breathe lava on any man who would try to kiss her. The truth was she never actually found any of the men in her own village attractive. Her primary issue with so many of the shinobi in her village was their weird shark teeth, which she just found downright creepy. A shudder ran through her as she looked over at her travel companion Chojuro, who was cursed with said teeth. Recently she had battled a rogue ninja from the Leaf Village named Sasuke Uchiha. Now there was a man who was a feast for the eyes. She sighed disappointedly. It was a shame that he was one of the most notorious and wanted men in the whole world, so pursuing him was out of the question. She did know that she needed a man like him though, pretty on the eyes and strong enough to stand up to anyone on the battlefield. She hoped that the village hidden in the leaves would be the place to find such a man. Mei definitely wanted a younger husband, and she had heard many rumors about the promising young class of shinobi that had once included Sasuke Uchiha. The fact was most of the male ninjas she had encountered from the Leaf Village were very handsome, well, maybe with the exception of the ones with those strange Byakugan eyes. So she was quite excited at the prospect of being able to pick from an entire village full of them. She noticed out of the corner of her eye Ao saying something to her which she had been totally oblivious to while she was lost in her thoughts. Ao said, "Did you hear that, Lady Mizukage? I said I think this personal trip to meet with the Hokage when the village is getting ready for war is totally unnecessary and pointless." Mei saw the walls of the Leaf Village approaching on the horizon as she said to her annoying advisor, "I don't care what you think about this mission, and if I hear you say anything else about it before we get to the Leaf Village." She leaned in close to his ear for the last part and whispered, "I will kill you." She smiled as she saw the stunned look on his face. Naruto was incredibly glad that Granny Tsunade was out of her coma, but that didn't stop him from being annoyed at the lame D-rank missions he'd been constantly assigned to since she woke up. He was currently stomping towards her newly rebuilt office to complain to her about giving him some real ninja work. He was the village hero after all. He actually wasn't that annoyed, but he thought that it would feel good to burst into her office and scream at her about low-rank missions, and have her yell back at him just like much happier and peaceful times in the Leaf Village, before pain ravaged it. Naruto was hoping to get away from the village for a little bit though. He was super nervous about running into Hinata outside of a group setting. The two of them had not really talked about what happened during the battle with Pain when she confessed her love to him before sacrificing herself to save him. Naruto didn't know what he would say to her, or even really how he felt about the whole situation. He was just glad that Hinata's natural shyness had creeped back to the surface and she had not approached him yet. Naruto sighed and rubbed his hand through his spiky hair as his brain mulled over the Hyuga heiress. Throughout his entire life he had been solely locked into his crush on Sakura and never really thought too much about other girls. Recently though, Sakura had told him she loved him, what he always had wanted to hear, but he knew that there was some amount of hollowness in it. Hinata's confession, however, ringed with a truth and fierceness that he could not deny, not to mention that she was willing to die just for the slightest chance to save him. Naruto was still shocked that Hinata had such strong feelings for him. The two of them could not be any more different. She was the heir to the most influential clan in the village, whilst he was the outcast, cursed with a demon inside of him, shunned by so many for so long. He was loud and obnoxious and goofy at times, while Hinata was quiet and reserved and graceful, and beautiful. Now that he had been thinking more about her, he came to the realization that she really was beautiful. Her long luscious blue hair, her pale skin, the gentle lavender of her special eyes, her very shapely and firm. He shook his head, cursing to himself, "Damn you pervy sage, making me think that about her," because even with all of the wonderful physical attributes she had, by far the most beautiful thing about her was who she was. She was so sweet and kind, but on top of that she could be a true warrior when she needed to be, and she was so fearless and loyal. He had told her this many times, and he had always meant it. Hinata Hyuga was amazing. This amazing girl was in love with him and he had no idea about what he was going to do. It kept mulling over and over in his head that the next time he saw Hinata he had no idea how to act around her. He had never kissed a girl, let alone had a girlfriend, but Hinata was in love with him, and he couldn't deny that he'd like to kiss her, date Hinata, but going from never having a girlfriend to something with such serious emotions behind it was unknown territory for Naruto, and he was pretty sure he'd be a lot less nervous battling a million ninjas than being alone on a date with Hinata. It was times like this that he really missed Jiraiya. He always felt like he could talk about anything with the old geezer, and even if he didn't get an answer, just putting it all out there would help clear out his mind. Like with this particular problem, he was certain that Jiraiya's advice would be straight from his Make Out Paradise series, and thus completely useless to Naruto. He could maybe try Kakashi-sensei, but that was nerve-wracking in its own way, not to mention also wrought with the possibility of more advice from the sleazy line of novels. He approached the doors of Tsunade's Hokage building and took a deep breath as he thought to himself, "Oh well, if I can't talk to pervy sage, I'll have to do the next best thing to clear my mind," yelling at Granny Tsunade. The two most powerful Kunoichi in the world sat across the Hokage's desk, eyeing each other warily. At Mei's request, both her retainers and Shizune had been excused from the room so that she and Tsunade could speak together. A few minutes of intense staring, Tsunade finally broke the silence and said, "Well, as nice as it is that you came here personally to check on me, Mei, why don't we cut the bullshit and get to the real reason you came to the Leaf Village in such a hectic time?" The younger woman laughed at the bluntness of the question and replied with a little chuckle, "That's why they always liked you, Tsunade, straight and to the point, to hell with the niceties." Tsunade smiled back as she retorted, "Well, out with it then, it must be important for you to come all the way here personally." A slight blush appeared on the face of the Mizukage as she said, "Well, to be perfectly honest, before the war starts I want to really secure our alliance and arrange a political marriage between our two villages." Tsunade looked at her skeptically, as she snorted out, "Between whom exactly?" A mild amount of worry that Mei would suggest she marry one of their fish-faced shinobis, which if that was the case it would take every ounce of restraint she had to not punch the Mizukage to the other end of the universe. Mei spoke rather sheepishly, "Well, actually I was rather hoping to find a husband for myself here." Tsunade burst out in a full-fledged gut-busting laugh as she processed what the Mizukage had just said. Mei looked a little upset at the older woman laughing in her face, but ever the professional she shook it off and said, "This is no joke, Tsunade. What better way to truly broker an alliance between us than for me to marry one of your finer shinobi?" Tsunade smiled at the woman and said, "I bet your mother put you up to this. I remember her, she must be crazy having no grandkids yet." Mei sighed, surprised that the Hokage knew her mother and had pretty much hit the nail on her head. Her mother did not actually come up with this idea, but not having to deal with her nagging if she were to succeed in getting a husband was a definite perk. Tsunade kept smiling as she chuckled, saying, "Well, if you really want a husband, I don't blame you for coming here rather than finding one at home. The men are much better looking here." Tsunade continued, "I have no problem with this little personal mission of yours, I'm just going to let you know that I will not force any man into this political marriage, but if you find a man who is willing, I suppose I'll have to support such a convenient relationship to shore up the treaty between our villages. Let's have a drink to your good luck. Tsunade reached in her desk and pulled out a bottle of sake and 2 cups and poured them both a drink. They lifted their glasses and said a quick toast as Tsunade finished. I'll find you a nice guide to have the S-rank mission of escorting another cage around the village. Just as Tsunade finished saying that, the door to her office burst open and an all too familiar voice shouted, "Oba-chan, I'm sick of all these crap missions you've been giving me, I need a real mission now, Granny." Naruto finished as his blonde spiky hair and long muscular body came into full view of the room. Tsunade stood up from her chair and screamed at the top of her lungs, "How dare you interrupt me when I have such an important visitor? This is the last straw, punk. I'm gonna send you back to the academy once it's rebuilt." May's eyes took in the young man in front of her quite hungrily. When she first came here, she had hoped to snag someone who was dark and handsome like the Uchiha brothers. But now standing in front of her was the reincarnation of Minato Namikaze, the 4th Hokage, the most perfect male specimen she had ever seen. Years ago, when she had been a chunin, she saw the yellow flash of the leaf across the battlefield, and she had been mesmerized by his beauty. Now, so many years in the future, perhaps she would have her chance to snag the Adonis of a man who must be his son. The smile of a voracious predator who has just cornered their prey spread across her face as she spoke up to Tsunade. "Now, Tsunade, my friend, this shinobi looks like he deserves an S-rank mission." Naruto shook his head happily when he heard that, as Tsunade looked over at the Mizukage with a concerned look in her eyes as May finished her statement with the words, "I think I've found my man. Relationship he is bound to have with Hinata, and make her his girlfriend. There would be no way in the world he would ever betray her trust and love, no matter what this Mizukage threw at him." Tsunade nodded her head. "Excellent, Shikamaru. We will go with that plan to make sure that he and Hinata end up together. For now, I want you to be discreet but keep your eye on what is going on between Naruto and May. I will work on getting Hinata the confidence to go get her man. You are dismissed, but keep in mind, if Naruto ends up with the Mizukage, I will spend the rest of my days making your life the most miserable existence any man has ever had." With that, Shikamaru backed sheepishly out of the Hokage's office. Tsunade turned around and looked out the window, concern in her eyes. Naruto was the only boy she ever thought of as a son, and though she had a lot of confidence in Shikamaru, she knew that not letting Naruto get his heart played with and manipulated was one of the most important missions she has ever had. Naruto exited Ichiraku's with his belly full of ramen. He had restrained himself in the presence of the Mizukage and only had 3 bowls, while she had 2 bowls of miso flavor and said it was the best ramen she had ever had. May turned to him and grabbed his arm as she said, "All right, Naruto, now let's go up to the Hokage monument. I'm sure the view of the village from there is amazing." He nodded and agreed with her. "Yes, it really is. Sometimes I go up there to think, and dream of the day when my face will be up there next to Granny Tsunade." He felt her squeeze his arm and suddenly his cheeks got a little hot. He felt weird around the Mizukage. He had never been around a girl who was so touchy-feely. Pretty much the only time Sakura ever touched him was to smash him into the ground. May said, "I'm sure you'll make a great Hokage someday, Naruto," as she snuggled into him a little more. The two continued down the street toward the Hokage monument, drawing a lot of attention from the villagers. They elicited plenty of points and stares as the people were quite drawn to the sight of their new hero and the stunningly beautiful, not to mention flimsily dressed, woman who was draped on his arm. Naruto looked over at May and his eyes were drawn to the cleavage that she was showing off in her dress. She looked up at Naruto and saw his eyes locked on her chest, but once he noticed she saw him looking, he quickly turned his head away blushing. Naruto thought in his head, "Oh no, she caught me looking at her, she must think I'm some kind of perv. If the Mizukage tells Tsunade I was ogling her, I'm scared to think what Granny would do." A picture of Tsunade standing over him screaming about him being no better than Jiraiya as she threatened to castrate him flooded his mind. Mei saw the embarrassment on Naruto's face and thought he was so cute. She decided to try and ease the tension, so she said, "So Naruto, tell me about how you saved the village from the Akatsuki's attack." He replied, "Oh well, it wasn't much. I fought pain and eventually convinced him to abandon his quest for vengeance." Mei laughed and replied, "You make it sound so simple. I'm sure it must have been an impressive battle. From what I've heard, all of the Akatsuki are extremely powerful, so you must be quite the strong shinobi." Naruto said with a determined look on his face, "Yes, well, I've worked really hard. A lot of people have put their trust in me to save the world from the cycle of hate that it is trapped in now, and I'm going to do everything I can to not disappoint anyone. But I've still got a lot to do." His mind had drifted a little, thinking about Sasuke, and trying to keep the voices in his head that doubted if he could save his friend down. Mei looked at the expressions on the young blonde's face as his embarrassed shyness had been replaced by a much more serious and troubled expression. She initially was attracted to this young man because of how he looked and who his father was, but the more she spent time with him, she found herself being drawn in by the curious combination of inexperienced innocent teenager and man who was weighed down by all the troubles of the world being on his shoulders that existed inside Naruto. Naruto saw her eyes looking into his with a curious look in them, and she gave him a gentle smile. Suddenly Naruto was struck by just how beautiful she was. She may have been much older than him, but it didn't change the fact that she was one of the most beautiful women that he had ever seen. He watched her mouth start to move as she started to speak again. Unfortunately, the words she was saying were lost on him as his mind was focused on kissing those lips. He shook his head out of the daze he was in and said, "Sorry Mei, I didn't hear what you just said." Mei chuckled as she repeated her previous statement. "I said, Naruto, that you don't need to face this burden alone. All of us in the 5 great nations are going to fight alongside you and stop the Akatsuki." The two of them reached the top of the Hokage monument and Naruto said, "I like to go out on the head the 4th Hokage, he was my dad. I have a little blanket I hide up here. I'll grab it and we can sit on it and look at the village." The view was much better before Pain's attack, but now I like it more in a way because I can see the village coming back to life slowly, and every time I look down on it, it's grown a little more. Naruto pulled a blanket out from under a secret rock, and walked out onto his dad's head and placed the blanket down as he sat down on it, and Mei came up next to him and plunked down on the blanket. She said, "Wow, it's a little chilly up here." She then grabbed his arm and put it around her shoulder as she cozied up next to him. Naruto smiled. He couldn't exactly explain, it's something about being up here with Mei and having his arm wrapped around her felt really good. He had always dreamed about sitting up here on a date, just like this with Sakura, but part of him was skeptical that it could ever be so nice with his pink-haired crush. The strangest thing about the two of them up on the monument was how much it seemed like the Mizukage was enjoying it. After they had been sitting there for about a minute, Naruto felt Mei rest her head on his shoulder as she said, "Wow, this view really is amazing. I don't often get simple moments like this being a cage, it makes you miss it. Thanks for sharing this special place with me, Naruto." Naruto didn't know too much about women, but he felt like he was getting signals from the older woman that she wanted this to be a date. But that couldn't be the case. She was way older than him, not to mention incredibly beautiful, and a cage. There was no way a woman like that would want to be out on a date with him. She was probably just happy to be relaxing, no matter who she was with. He squeezed her a little tighter, and she smiled as she felt the heat from the boy envelop her. Mei thought to herself that she could really get used to this. As every minute went by in his arms, she became more and more determined to make sure that she succeeded in her mission. Naruto said shyly, "It's no problem, Mei. I'm glad to share the beauty with somebody else. I'm glad you picked me to be your escort." She said, "So am I, Naruto." She gave him a little peck on his cheek and then giggled a little as she saw his cheeks turn bright red in response to her small sign of affection. Soon it was going to be time to up the ante in her little game of seduction, and she was looking forward to it. Shikamaru looked down on Naruto and the Mizukage sitting on a blanket on top of the Hokage monument. He let out an exasperated sigh. When he first got this mission, he figured it was going to be simple, that there was no way Naruto, who was pretty naive in the way of women, was going to get involved with an older woman. Now that he was here watching them, he was starting to worry. They seemed very comfortable together, and Shikamaru had to admit that when he heard the Mizukage was trying to seduce Naruto, he constructed a mental image of what she would look like, and he could not have been more wrong. Shikamaru looked at the stacked red head snuggling up next to Naruto and felt he was a little envious. He was sure that the woman was troublesome, but with a body like that, a little nagging might be worth it even to him. Shikamaru guessed that the woman had deduced that Naruto was inexperienced and that a slow approach to build his trust was the best way to woo him. He did worry that once she decided to kick it up a notch and get a more aggressive, that even Naruto would have a hard time fighting his more base urges. He would have to report to Tsunade that the two were getting close, and that she should pump up Hinata and get her to go after Naruto as soon as possible. Shikamaru made a shadow clone who he left to keep the two of them under surveillance and made his way back towards the Hokage's building. This really wasn't good. When he got to Tsunade's office, she was not going to be happy, and he could certainly expect some shouting. I mean, what is he supposed to do? Jump down and keep the two physically separated? His plan was to use Hinata to keep the two apart, and Tsunade said that she was going to take on that aspect, so really it was up to her to take care of it. Shikamaru rubbed the back of his head and knew that all of the logic in the world wouldn't do him any good in the face of an outraged Tsunade. How did he get stuck with such troublesome duties, and on top of it all he was going to have deal with Tamari, as that Kunoichi was due in the village any day now. Whenever that sandy-haired vixen was around, she was always hanging around him, and he was sure that she would be curious about why he had to follow around Naruto. Then she'd nag him till he eventually spilled the truth, and then Tsunade would kill him. Ugh! He groaned out loud as he thought, man, Hinata, I really hope you can come through for me and make it easy by snagging Naruto. Mei and Naruto spent a few hours talking and getting to know each other on top of the monument. Eventually the sun set and it was early evening, so the two of them made their way to the house that had been set aside for her and her companions to stay in while she was in Konoha. Once they reached the front door, Mei said, "Thanks for today, Naruto. I'm looking forward to our date tomorrow morning." She pulled him into a hug and gave him a quick peck on the cheek. She then finished with, "Good night, see you tomorrow." With that she went into the house and closed the door behind her. Naruto stood there looking at the door with a stunned expression on his face, as he thought nervously to himself, did she just say date? Mei was in her room at the house Tsunade had set aside for her stay in Konoha. Ever since Naruto dropped her off, Mei had been wrestling with a strange mixture of disappointment and nervous excitement. She spent the hour immediately after their separation picking out the outfit she was going to wear when he met her in the morning. She felt kind of silly being so worked up after just one sort of date with a teenager, but she also felt refreshed and happy that she could still get these feelings of infatuation. Since becoming Mizukage, her life had gotten much more interesting and exciting in many ways, but the romantic part was a sad casualty. Ao had suggested she marry some rich sibling of one of the feudal lords years ago, and that arranged date had been a disaster, as not only was he like 15 years older than her, but he was also disgustingly fat. That was the closest she had ever come to killing her advisor like she has so often threatened. Mei flopped down on the bed as her mind continued to fixate on Naruto. Here she was, one of the most powerful shinobi in the world, lying on her bed like a giddy schoolgirl, her mind awash, drowning in a giant pool of blue orbs nestled on a certain blonde's face. She smiled as she thought of his silly grin, and how cute he looked when he was shy and nervous around her. She had spent the last few years having the romance part of her brain completely shut down, and now it seemed like it had kicked immediately into overdrive. She knew that while tomorrow would be fun, it was going to take every ounce of restraint she had to not jump him on the spot once she saw him in the morning. Mei was still sure that Naruto was quite inexperienced, and she still had to take a cautious, careful approach so she wouldn't scare him off. She kicked off her shoes in frustration as she realized that when she came up with this plan to marry a leaf shinobi, she didn't really think it through. She was the leader of her village, and could not spend forever in Konoha forging a relationship with a teenager. She also doubted that in only the week or so that she was going to spend with Naruto she could convince him to abandon his village and friends and run away with her. She supposed that she figured she'd find some handsome man who would be so excited and enthralled by her that he'd agree in a heartbeat and marry her. She was sure that she could do that still, but now that she had met Naruto no other man would do for her. If only it were as simple as she wanted it to be, drag Naruto up into her room and shackle him to the bed and ride him day and night for a week until he slipped into a coma and mindlessly followed her home to Kurigakure. The image of Naruto on her bed invaded her mind, her legs spread wide straddling the teenager, her hands rubbing the taut muscles of his abdomen. Watching him react as her lips made contact with his flesh. She imagined his hands caressing her. As his tongue tickled her nipples, her actual hand started to make its way down inside of her panties when suddenly a loud knock on her door snapped her out of her carnal fantasy. She groaned in disappointment as she screamed, "What is it?" Ao's voice replied, "I have the information you asked me to gather, my lady." Mei scooted off the bed and quickly regained her composure as she said, "That's fine, you can enter, Ao." The door opened and her advisor with the eye patch shuffled in. She said, "So what did you find?" Ao replied, "Well, as we discussed earlier, Naruto is the Jinchuriki of the nine-tailed fox and son of the fourth Hokage. I was not able to discern who his mother was. Apparently it is some sort of village secret. In fact, his father's identity is known by very few. He recently saved the village from the attack by Pain, and he has apparently mastered Sage Mode. He was the student of the legendary Sannin Jiraiya, and is looked on as the adopted nephew of the fifth Hokage. He was a member of a genin team with Sakura Haruno and Sasuke Uchiha. The team is led by the copy ninja Kakashi Hatake. Apparently he is best friends, / rivals with Sasuke Uchiha, and despite the rest of the village condemning the rogue ninja, Naruto has taken it as a personal mission to redeem him and return him to the village." Mei asked, "That is all good, what about his love life, does he have a girlfriend?" Ao looked over curiously at his leader, surprised by her question, but he responded, "Well, from what I gathered he seems to have had a long-standing crush on his teammate Sakura Haruna. She has repeatedly shot down his advances though. There is another girl, the heiress of the Hyuga clan, Hinata. She has apparently been in love with him since their days at the academy, whilst the boy was oblivious to it. During Pain's attack it is rumored that Naruto was nearly captured and the Hyuga girl stepped in to rescue him and also professed her love for him at the same time. Then Pain nearly killed her and that caused Naruto to lose it and summon the powers of the demon inside him to finally defeat Pain. The village is apparently quite happy about the prospect of their new hero getting together with the heiress of the most influential clan in the village." He noticed a very subtle look of concern cross her face and that made him even more curious as to her intentions towards the blonde boy. Mei stared off into space and said, "Thank you, Ao, you can leave now." Ao bowed his head and replied, "Yes, my lady," as he backed out of the room and closed the door behind him. Mei mulled over the information she had just received. She was seriously hoping to hear a simple reply of, "No," to her question about his girlfriend. The first girl Ao mentioned did not seem like much of a threat, but what she heard about Hinata Hyuga did seem like it could be trouble. A confession of love in a life and death moment, that carried a more intense weight than anything she was hoping to deal with. Apparently she was going to have a serious rival for Naruto. No matter, there was no way she would lose out to a teenage girl with creepy white eyes. She remembered she had one more thing to deal with before she was going to go to bed, so she put on her shoes again and left by the window, not wanting to alert her retainers she was out of the house. Hinata lay in the dark on her bed. She wasn't trying to sleep, she just didn't want to deal with anything or anyone at the moment. She still had a nauseating feeling in her stomach from what she saw earlier in the day on the street. The image of Naruto and the redhead arm in arm had been running in a constant loop through her head all day and night. She regretted her decision to not follow the two of them to wherever they were going. Then a minute later she was glad to not know what happened to them, because if her worst fears ever became truth she didn't know how she would handle it. A fierce battle of her thoughts had been waged in her mind just like that since she saw Naruto with her. Hinata had watched Naruto from afar for years now, but now that the cat was out of the bag about her feelings watching him was so much more painful. She didn't want him to reject her, but this limbo that she was currently floating in, having no idea what he thought about her and her feelings was just about as bad as an outright rejection. She was angry at herself for feeling like this. It's not like Naruto was her boyfriend, and on top of that she hadn't actually seen him doing anything with the older woman. Still the way they looked snuggled up close like that couldn't be good. Hinata had always envisioned her first kiss with Naruto. They would both be shy and nervous because they had never kissed anyone before. It would be a perfect moment in time, and they would eventually turn that kiss into dating, and then a marriage, and a life together. She smiled as the dream she has carried for most of her life lingered in her mind for a second before the harshness of reality dragged her down. Hinata knew that Naruto was away on a training mission with Jiraiya the legendary Toad Sage for 3 years. Jiraiya was a notorious pervert and ladies' man, and though it never seemed like Naruto had picked up any of these traits, maybe he was just good at hiding it. Maybe that woman had already taken Naruto away from her. Maybe they were right now in his bed, her long legs wrapped around his body as he screamed her name into her fiery red hair. Hinata shook her head trying to physically shake the disturbing images out of her head. For so many years the only girl she worried about was Sakura, who thankfully had always been ignorant of how wonderful Naruto is. Now there was another nameless woman coming after Naruto, and not a normal woman either. This woman looked like she was sculpted straight out of one of Jiraiya's dirtiest fantasies. Even if Hinata was lucky enough that nothing had happened between the two of them yet, it was likely only a matter of time. Hinata heard a gentle knock on her door, and she turned in her bed away from the door not acknowledging it. Another knock about 20 seconds later was followed by the door opening slowly and her sister Hanabi poked her head through the door. Hanabi said in a very soft and gentle tone, "Sorry to disturb you Hinata, but this came from the Hokage's office for you." Hinata rolled over in her bed and saw her sister holding a rolled-up piece of parchment that looked like an official document. Hinata said, "Oh thanks Hanabi, just put it on my desk okay." Her sister walked across the room and placed it on the desk and then left the room. Hinata got up and headed over to the desk picking the parchment up. She saw the Hokage's official seal and knew it must be important, so she cracked it open and read the contents. It was very simple and straightforward, demanding Hinata show up for an audience with the Hokage first thing in the morning. She put it down and then collapsed back onto her bed, saying to herself that maybe a mission would be good for her, get out of town so she could save herself the stress of seeing Naruto and his new friend. Naruto was usually a very sound sleeper, but tonight his mind was just flooded with too many thoughts to let a peaceful rest wash over him. His day with Mei had been very interesting, and he was glad to make friends with another Kage. Her parting words about being anxious for their date tomorrow still rang in his ears. He still found it hard to believe that a woman like her would want to have anything to do with him like that, and was convinced that she meant the word date in a very neutral fashion. There was another voice in his head that had been getting louder and louder the longer he tossed and turned in his bed that had quite the contrary opinion though. It kept screaming that all the signs were there that she wanted it to be a date. Naruto knew very little about women, and he was well aware of that fact. He knew that he could very easily be misreading things, but even if he did misread them he couldn't deny that there was definitely something there. Whenever he had seen pervy sage around women who seemed to like him, they were always hanging on his arm and touching him. Naruto rubbed his arm and thought about how for hours Mei had either been holding it or wrapping it around herself almost constantly. Naruto chuckled as he thought of the expression Jiraiya would have made if Mei had been holding his arm like that. It probably would have been worse than the first time Naruto and Konohamaru had cornered him and showed off their newest collaboration jutsu, the super ultimate harem jutsu. His laugh subsided as the nerves of what it meant if she really did mean tomorrow to be a date hit him. Naruto couldn't deny that Mei was incredibly pretty. She had colorful hair, something he always found very attractive, not to mention her green eyes, which were just about perfect. Orange had always been his favorite color, but the one exception to that was in women's eyes. He loved green eyes like Sakura's and now like Mei's. Though he did have to admit that he had never seen a woman with orange eyes, and if he ever did, he was pretty sure it would be damn sexy. He could see himself brushing that bang she covered half her face with out of the way and both of his eyes locking on hers as he gently cupped her cheek and leaned in to capture her pretty pink lips with his own. Thinking about her in this way sent a wave of nervous energy rushing through his body. It was times like this that he really wished he had followed Jiraiya's advice on their trips together and hooked up with a girl. Even if he was right and Mei did want him to make a move on her, she was like 30 and had probably been on millions of dates. How was he not going to totally embarrass himself? What if he was a terrible kisser? Or what if he was really good and she wanted to take things further? His body got extremely excited at that prospect as he remembered how incredible her looked in that dress. The thought of them without the dress and being within the reach of his hands almost completely blew his mind. But then what if he did totally misread the situation, and he made a move and she killed him and then turned him into Tsunade for being a perv? Naruto flopped around in exasperation for about a minute thinking, man, woman make things so screwy. Then his mind wandered to the other woman who was complicating his life, Hinata. He still had barely talked to her since she told him that she loved him and sacrificed herself for him. He felt bad thinking about another woman while leaving things so unsettled between them, but there was nothing he could do. He was still very unsure about how to handle her, and being sidetracked by this whole Mei situation certainly hadn't made things any easier. The best thing would probably be to just ignore Hinata for a few more days, deal with Mei for as long as she was around, and maybe he could use whatever happened between him and Mei, if anything did, to help him sort out his feelings for Hinata. He laughed at himself. That sounds like a terrible idea, but it was the only one he had at the moment, so he was just going to have to run with it. Laying sleepless in his bed, Shikamaru was anxious about tomorrow as he had gotten confirmation that Tamari was going to be coming into town in the morning. He did not look forward to having to explain to her why he couldn't escort her around town all day like he usually did, because he had to keep an eye on Naruto. Tamari would probably say that it was okay because she'd just help him tail Naruto, and then he'd have to try and keep his mission secret while she was bothering him all day. Not to mention the fact that following Naruto was likely to be a major pain in the. Plus Shikamaru was considering finally making his move on Tamari. The two had been dancing around it for years, and he was getting way too horny to keep playing it coy. He had been flirting a lot with Shiho recently, and then there was always the constant games he played with Ino. Unfortunately, Shikamaru knew that if he ever actually did anything with either of those two girls, Tamari would use the most blunt part of her giant fan like a hacksaw and slowly remove his testicles. So he figured that since Tamari had already basically claimed him as hers, he might as well be getting some of the action he wanted from her, and following Naruto around was not the best way to set the mood, romantically. Suddenly Shikamaru felt a weight crash down on his bed and a hand cover his mouth. He opened his eyes and looked up to see the Mizukage straddling him with one hand covering his mouth, the other hand having one finger up to her mouth as if she were shushing him. She looked down at him with murder in her green eyes as she started to speak. Don't worry, I'm not going to hurt you, I just want to talk. I noticed you following Naruto and I around all day, so I can only assume that you are Tsunade's lapdog that she assigned to keep an eye on me. Shikamaru nodded and the redhead continued, I have no problem with you watching, in fact that kinda turns me on. As she said that part she winked at him and grinded her pelvis on him slowly. Feeling the gorgeous redhead grind on top of him with only a flimsy sheet between them was starting to have an effect on little Shikamaru. She pulled the hand off his mouth and started to very seductively lick each of her fingers, still grinding her hips on his. She smiled as she said, "I see you like this little boy. Like I said, I don't mind if you watch, but get in the way of me and Naruto." Shikamaru noticed that each finger she had licked now had what looked like a little red ball of lava on it, and then he saw that hand reach under the blanket as she continued her statement, "And what you're feeling now will be like a cool breeze that you'll beg for." Suddenly he felt her hand grab his balls, and where each of her fingertips touched it he felt an intense heat burn into his balls. He groaned in pain as she pulled her hand off after about 2 seconds. She leaned down and gave him a peck on the forehead as she said, "I hope we have an understanding." Shikamaru just nodded dumbly as he was still shocked by what just happened, and his balls felt like someone had just put out 5 cigarettes on them. She smiled at him with the scariest face he had ever seen and said, "Excellent, now good night and sweet dreams." Then she got off his bed and exited through his window. Shikamaru turned on his light and looked down at his groin and saw 5 fingerprints branded into his nuts. Seeing that all the feelings of jealousy he had for Naruto about being seduced by the hot older redhead were quickly melted away, and also suddenly dating Tamari didn't seem too bad. Shikamaru casually leaned on the walls outside of Konoha waiting for Tamari to show up. He had received a message from her saying that she would be coming in early in the morning and that she hoped to see him as soon as possible. Which he translated to, "Be waiting for me outside or there will be hell to pay." The previous night was still burning in Shikamaru's mind figuratively, and burned on his balls literally. He had spent about an hour icing his boys down after his late-night rendezvous, and during that time he decided that when he saw Tamari this morning he was going to stop footing around and make his move. She was already making his life miserable whenever she was around. Okay, he admitted to himself, it's a good kind of miserable. He figured that if he was going to be miserable he may as well be getting some from her. He was 99% sure that she wouldn't shoot him down, and if she did at least it would save the Mizukage the trouble of killing, after thinking that he saw on the horizon the form of the sandy blonde Kunoichi that he was obsessing over making her way up the road that led into Konoha. He took a deep breath and rubbed his spiky hair as suddenly he felt the cliché butterflies in his stomach that he usually got around Tamari, but on a much grander scale. The moments ticked by at an agonizingly slow pace as Tamari approached him. He leaned back against the wall, exhaling loudly, mentally preparing himself for what he was about to do. Once Tamari was within speaking range she laughed and said, "Just as I expected, Shadow Boy, you just couldn't wait to see me." He sprung from the wall at a surprising pace to close the distance between them and said, "Shut up, woman." As he grabbed her face and turned her towards him and lowered his lips down onto hers. Tamari was shocked as she felt his tongue probing for entry into her mouth, but after about a second she happily accepted his kiss. She moaned in pleasure as one of her free hands grabbed Shikamaru's and pulled him into her body. Their tongues danced together for about a minute till they finally broke apart. Tamari leaned in and kissed his neck and whispered in his ear, "God, how I've been waiting for you to do that. What the hell took you so long?" Shikamaru laughed and replied, "Oh, I've finally lost my mind." Then he pulled her in for another kiss. The next several minutes passed by in a serious make-out session between the two. He pulled back and said, "Man, that was so much better than I imagined it was going to be." She poked him and said, "Oh, and just how long have you been imagining it?" He said, "For far too long. If I had known you were going to give it up this easily I would have made my move back when I was 13. Tamari gave him a death stare as she huffed, "Oh, I'm easy, am I? Huh, well, just wait and see how long it is until you get any more of this." She motioned up and down her body. He laughed as he wrapped his arms completely around her and pulled her face right into his and smiled a confident smile as he joked, "You and I both know there's no way you can deny me." He caressed her cheek and locked onto her emerald green eyes. She gave him a shy smile and blushed a little bit as he continued, the playfulness gone in his voice, replaced by a very serious tone. "I really am an idiot, Tamari. You are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. I don't know what took me so long, but I want to make up for every second that we've wasted." His lips greedily crashed down on hers again as they lost themselves in another kiss. She pulled back and said in a flustered voice, "God Shika, how did you get to be such a good kisser?" Her eyes darkened as she started to say, "You haven't been pracked." She was cut off by another kiss of his. He replied, pulling back, "Shish Tamari, don't worry, I only practiced with Choji." Then he shot her a ridiculous grin. She couldn't help but laugh at the absurd statement and quickly retorted, "Well then maybe I'd better go see how good he's gotten." Shikamaru wrapped her tightly into a hug and whispered in her ear, "Nah, that's not going to happen. Now that I've got you, I'm not ever going to let you go." He squeezed her tight and Tamari felt a rush of excitement at the possessive tone in his voice. She had never been so happy in her life. She was the sister of the cage and presented a tough as nails image to the world. Well, it wasn't really so much an image as she really was just as strong as her Jonin status would suggest. Still inside of her there was a young woman who had longed for a moment like this, and for some reason she didn't fully understand. For years now in these girlish fantasies the hero was always the lazy shinobi who was now holding onto her like they were the only two people in the world. She rested her head on his shoulder and let out a contented sigh. She had always enjoyed the antagonistic and flirtatious nature of the relationship between herself and Shikamaru. The tension created by their pent-up desires being buried always made being around him feel so electric, but now she couldn't wait to see what kind of sparks would be created when they both let those desires bubble fully to the surface. She whispered in his ear in the most seductive voice she could muster, "Let's take this to your bedroom, Shikamaru." He groaned and replied, "Well, Tamari, as much as I want to, and Lord knows I want to." Little Shikamaru, standing at full attention despite the recent ball torture incident, was testimony to that. "Unfortunately, I'm in the middle of a very annoying mission right now, and if this were any normal sort of mission I'd blow it off, but Lady Tsunade gave this to me personally, and if she ever found out I blew it off to do that, well, let's just say our first time would also be our last." Tamari looked over at him, kind of concerned, curious about what kind of important mission this could be. She asked the obvious question, "What kind of mission is it? Can I help?" He replied, "Well, I don't really need your help, but you're more than welcome to tag along as I'm sure it's going to be incredibly tedious and boring." She looked at him still confused about the mission and asked, "So what exactly is it then?" He shrugged and answered, "Oh, I just have to follow Naruto around town and make sure he doesn't run off and marry the Mizukage." Tamari laughed at his answer, but then noticed the quite serious expression that he was still sporting. She replied, "You're serious? The Mizukage is in town and is after Naruto?" He nodded his head. She thought about it for a few moments and said, "Wow, I feel sorry for Naruto. She can be kind of scary when she wants to." Shikamaru replied with a nervous laugh, "Oh, believe me, I'm well aware of that." Hinata stood outside the door of the Hokage's office wondering what sort of mission she was going to be assigned. Shizune opened the door and said to the Hyuga girl, "Okay, you can come in now, Hinata. Lady Tsunade is ready for you." Hinata walked past the assistant to the Hokage and walked into the room to see the older woman sitting at her desk. Shizune exited and closed the door behind her. Hinata stood in front of the Hokage's desk, eyes to the floor as she said, "Hello, Lady Hokage, do you have a mission for me?" Tsunade looked over the young pale girl in front of her and couldn't help but admit that she was a little skeptical of Shikamaru's plan. Hinata at times was a good ninja, and if what Tsunade had heard was true about her standing up to pain, then that showed maybe there was the potential for much more. However, throwing Hinata head-to-head in a bout with Mei seemed kind of like throwing a lamb to slaughter. Still, she had a lot of confidence in Shikamaru, and would at least initially give his plan a chance. Tsunade spoke up, "Well, it's not exactly an official mission, but I do want to talk to you about a very serious matter." Hinata started to get nervous as she heard the Hokage's words. Tsunade continued, "I want to talk to you about Naruto, and what happened during Pain's attack, and what you plan on doing about it from this point on." Hinata groaned on the inside. She felt embarrassed enough about the situation. Talking to the Hokage about it was absolutely mortifying. Tsunade kept going. First, is it true that you saved Naruto from pain, and then told him that you loved him? Hinata nodded her head and then meekly answered, well, I didn't exactly save him, but I did confess my feelings. Tsunade looked at the girl a little proud and a little sad and asked, well, what did Naruto say? Hinata replied, well, with the village being rebuilt and all, we haven't really gotten a chance to talk. Plus, he's been running around town with some tramp, she finished to herself in her head. Tsunade measured the girl in her eyes and decided that if she was going to get Hinata to take any kind of action, she was going to have to light a major fire under the girls. Tsunade started into her. Well, Hinata, I don't know if you are aware of this, but that boy who you are supposedly in love with is currently being targeted by the Mizukage of the village hidden in the mist. Hinata looked horrified. She just saw him yesterday. Surely he can't be hurt. She tried to console herself. She asked, almost afraid of the answer, he's not hurt, is he? Tsunade laughed. I wouldn't be worried about Naruto if she wanted to hurt him. He can take care of himself. Hearing Tsunade say the word, she, made something click in Hinata's mind. Could that woman she saw yesterday be the Mizukage? Tsunade continued, no, the Mizukage has quite the opposite in mind. She wants to marry him. Hinata felt all the air get sucked out of her like she had just been punched in the gut by the words that came out of the Hokage's mouth. When Hinata saw Naruto with that redhead yesterday, she was worried, but somewhere in the back of her mind she was comforted by the fact that even if he had with her, she would always take him back. No matter what he did, Hinata would always accept Naruto. The news that the beautiful woman she saw him with was not only a cage, but also wanted to marry Naruto was devastating. She wasn't just some random skank, she was beautiful and powerful, and she wanted to take Naruto away forever. Hinata looked crestfallen as she absorbed the news. Tsunade looked at the girl and could feel the anger starting to rise inside of her. She started to shout at the girl. Is that all you're going to do, Hinata? Sit in my office and look sad. You said you loved him, you almost died for him, and here comes some woman from another village and you're just going to give up. I love Naruto like a son, and if you're going to act this pathetic, Hinata, you don't deserve to be with him. I don't want the Mizukage stealing him from this village, and I can see in your eyes that you really do love him, so go out there and do something about it. I know he didn't come and sweep you up in his arms right after you told him you loved him, but you know as well as I do what a knucklehead he is. You probably scared him. I know this is hard for you, but you've got to be bold, Hinata. Don't let Naruto screw this up for himself. This could be the most important moment in both of your lives, so go out there and get your man. Hinata felt a little better when she heard the Hokage's words, but she still had some doubts. She asked Tsunade, her voice shaking with trepidation, do you really think I have a chance, Lady Hokage? I really do love him and want to be with him. I'm just scared. I don't know what I'll do if he rejects me. Tsunade calmed down and felt a little bad for yelling at her. She answered, her voice softening up considerably, I don't know, Hinata. I don't have all the answers. I do know that Naruto has the biggest heart of anyone I've ever met, and you are one of his most precious people. The whole village had been devastated, and he was surrounded by death, but it wasn't until he thought pain killed you that he really lost it. Naruto may be loud and obnoxious, but underneath it all, when it comes to romance, he's really just as shy and innocent as you are. He probably didn't talk to you after the attack because he couldn't figure out how to tell you how much he appreciates what you did, and how much you mean to him. You've just got to be a little more forceful and make him tell you those things. Tsunade gave Hinata a reassuring smile as she finished. Hinata nodded her head, mustering up all the confidence she could as she replied, yes, Lady Hokage, I'm going to go out there and find Naruto and make him look me in the eyes and tell me how feels. Tsunade laughed and said, Naruto's an idiot. I suggest that when you see him you don't tell him how you feel, just walk up to him and kiss him, let him show you with his response. Hinata blushed at her suggestion but said, Okay, Lady Hokage, maybe I'll try that. Thank you for this talk, I really needed to hear this. Tsunade said, well, I just want Naruto to be happy, good luck Hinata. Hinata said her goodbyes and backed out of the office as Tsunade leaned back in her chair and pulled out a bottle of sake. She poured herself a glass and took a sip as she thought about the conversation she just had. She was still very uncertain if Hinata would actually be able to muster up the courage in the moment when she saw Naruto. Tsunade also did not know how Naruto actually felt about Hinata, and she hoped that she did not just send the girl to get crushed. She sighed as she thought to herself, well, if Shikamaru's wrong about Naruto's feelings for Hinata, then she'd have to play her last ace in the hole. She'd just order Sakura to seduce him. She was pretty sure that there was no way Naruto could turn down Sakura. Naruto was making his way down the street towards Mei's house. His heart was racing, he still wasn't sure what she meant by saying today was a date, and the more he thought about it, the more and more nervous he got. He was still scared about trying something and Mei being shocked that he would try to kiss her. He also really had no idea about how do you go about trying to kiss a girl. Should you ask her? No, that seemed lame, he answered his own question. So then what do you just wait for? The moment, and then lean in and do it. How the hell was he supposed to recognize when the time was right? Plus there was the very real possibility that the time was never going to be right and he was only going to make a complete of himself. Maybe he should just give up on the idea altogether. Yay, that's the best idea, why take the risk of being totally wrong, he'd just do what he did yesterday. Naruto turned the corner onto her street and saw that Mei was sitting on a bench outside waiting for him. His eyes almost popped out of his head when he saw the tiny little pure white sundress that she was wearing that showed off almost the entirety of her long supple legs. Not to mention the way it bunched up around her, showing off just how enormous and delicious they looked. She turned her head towards him and smiled large as she got up and approached him. Suddenly the voice of his teenage libido started shouting in his mind, I don't care if we have a 1 in a million chance, there is no way I'm letting you wuss out on us. Look at her. Naruto smiled nervously as she came close and said, oh hey Mei, you look really pretty. She laughed lightly at his compliment and replied, thanks Naruto, before we take off today there is one thing I want to clear up. As she said that, she grabbed one of his hands and lifted it up, putting it directly on her. Naruto looked like a deer caught in the headlights as she leaned in and whispered, I really am looking forward to this date. Then she kissed him as deeply and passionately as she ever has any man in her entire life. Naruto was stunned as Mei's lips crashed down on his, but after about 2 seconds instinct kicked in and he happily started to return the kiss. But suddenly he was shocked by a very familiar angry voice screaming, Naruto. He pulled back from Mei and turned right in time to get punched right in the gut by his longtime crush Sakura. He fell to his knees as she looked down on him, rage burning in her eyes as she shouted, oh my god Naruto, you creep, groping this poor woman in the middle of the street. You cannot become like that pervert teacher of yours. Naruto stuttered out, with fear in his voice, Sakura-chan, it's not, I didn't, she kissed me. Mei, who was filled with disappointment by her first kiss with Naruto being interrupted, looked on the scene in front of her with confusion. She stared at the pink-haired girl in front of her with serious curiosity. She thought to herself, this is the Sakura girl with whom Naruto has had a crush on for years. So this was one of her romantic rivals. Mei was upset that the girl was not as ugly as she had hoped for. Despite her smallish and largish forehead, the girl had beautifully colorful pink hair, and big hopeful green eyes. Overall, Mei decided the girl was very pretty, which dragged her already disappointed mood a little further down. While Mei had been sizing up Sakura, inside of Sakura's mind she was still processing the information that this older woman kissed Naruto. She looked at the woman standing there and couldn't help but feel a little self-conscious. This older redhead might have been the most beautiful woman she had ever seen. Sakura said, still surprised, she kissed you Naruto. But she looks old enough to be your mother. Hearing those words come out of the pink-haired girl's mouth snapped Mei to attention and pissed her off. She turned to Sakura, and said in a deathly creepy and serious voice, I am the Mizukage, and Naruto is my escort around Konoha. I would appreciate it if you would stop attacking him and let us get on our way. Sakura is it. I'm sure Lady Tsunade would not be very pleased to find out one of her ninjas was harassing a cage of another village. Mei would have loved to boil this girl in lava, but being in an enemy village she had to stay civil, much to her chagrin. Sakura was becoming even more confused. This woman was the Mizukage and she was kissing Naruto. What the hell was going on here? She heard the voice of the Mizukage continue, come on Naruto, let's go. Naruto was still on his knees and looked up at Mei and saw that she was giving Sakura an evil-looking stare. He then turned to Sakura and saw a strange combination of shock, embarrassment, and anger all swimming on her face. Naruto got up and said to Sakura, well, I guess I have to go, see you later Sakura-chan. With that he turned and Mei made sure to latch onto his arm as the two of them walked off, leaving Sakura standing there stunned. Sakura stood there still bewildered by what just happened. When she first saw Naruto kissing that woman, she felt rage build up inside of her that she couldn't explain. Then finding out that the woman was the Mizukage shocked her. Why would the leader of a hidden village be making out with Naruto? She shuddered as she remembered seeing his hand on her. That image bothered her in a way she didn't understand. Just what the hell was going on here? She scratched her head, and turned around to make her way to Lady Tsunade's office. She had a lot of questions that needed answers. Naruto felt Mei squeezing his arm as the two of them walked away from Sakura. He looked back briefly and saw Sakura still standing in the same spot, confusion still written all over her face. He felt kind of bad leaving her there, but then he looked back over at Mei and saw her eyes were staring up at him with what looked like concern. He was confused as all hell. Mei just kissed him rather forcefully, and it was awesome, and he wanted to do it again. Still being hit by Sakura moments after that made him feel guilty about enjoying it. Throughout most of his life whenever he thought about kissing a girl it was always Sakura that he thought about, but her attitude always made it seem like that would never happen. And now he was here with a beautiful woman who not only would let him kiss her, but seemed to really want it. Naruto wouldn't hold back any longer. Bright blue eyes had been locked with smoky green eyes in an angst-infused silence for moments that seemed like an eternity when finally Naruto gave in to his desire and crashed his lips down on Mei's. Their lips locked together, the two of them backed off of the street and she pushed him up against a wall. Their lips didn't break apart for minutes, but eventually they both came up for air. Naruto's head fell back against the wall as he caught his breath. His heart was racing as he felt Mei put her head on his chest. He leaned down and kissed her on the top of her head, and then he said, wow Mei, that was great. She said, yay Naruto, it really was. She looked up at him and smiled and then gave him light peck on the lips. She tried to pull back, but he didn't let her as he captured her lips for another passionate kiss. She eventually did manage to pull away and she wrapped her arms around him and nuzzled her head in his chest again as she said, I don't know why Naruto, but being around you just makes me feel more alive than I have been in years. From the moment I first got around you I just wanted to get to know you more and more. Suddenly the tender moment was broken up by Naruto's stomach grumbling. Naruto looked embarrassed as he said, sorry, I didn't eat breakfast. Mei giggled as she replied, well, as much as I'd love to stay here snuggled up against you, I suppose we'll have to grab a bite to eat. With that the two of them backed off of the wall that they had been making out against and headed off towards a restaurant for breakfast. The words, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, were running on a loop inside of Shikamaru's head as he watched Naruto and Mei make out on the street. Temari looked over at him and asked, what was your mission again? He replied in a very somber voice, to watch Naruto and make sure nothing happens between him and the Mizukage. Temari laughed as she joked, well, you seem to be doing a pretty shitty job then, Shadow Boy. Shikamaru laughed sarcastically and replied, thanks for the help Tem, Just what I need from my girlfriend, an incredible ability to state the obvious. She continued laughing as she quipped back, oh, so I'm your girlfriend now, am I? I'm not sure if I want to be with a shinobi who fails at such easy missions. What was your plan anyway? Usually that pretty little brain of yours has already figured everything out, but here you seem to just be following along getting your kicked in. Shikamaru stared back at her, trying to figure out how to take the term, pretty little brain, and having to agree with her that he did appear to be going after this mission much less prepared than he usually is. He answered her question, my plan was to make Hinata confront Naruto with her feelings, and then hopefully he'd start to date her, and given his strong sense of loyalty he'd fight off whatever advances Mei threw at him because he was with Hinata. Tamari looked at him skeptically and said, that seems like an awful plan, why'd you pick Hinata? Wouldn't Sakura have been a much better choice? Though you might luck out seeing her reaction to him kissing Mei and the way she looked after they walked off together, she might go and stop this on her own. Shikamaru answered, I picked Hinata because she told Naruto she loved him right before she threw herself in front of Pain to save him, and also Sakura tried to tell him she loved him to stop him from going after Sasuke still, and Naruto didn't believe her. I'm convinced that if Hinata would ever show the hell up my plan would work, but she's been a ghost. I left Lady Tsunade in charge of convincing her to go after Naruto, but I have no idea how it's going. Tamari shrugged as she responded, I guess you're better friends with Naruto than me, so if you're convinced that Hinata will work, I'll believe you. Though I always personally hoped and figured he'd eventually wear Sakura down, I think Naruto and Sakura would be a cute couple. Shikamaru gave her a funny look as she said that. She shrugged her shoulders and said, whatever. Well, they finally stopped making out. Tamari motioned her head down towards the street where Naruto and Mei had started walking arm in arm again. She asked, what are you going to do in the meantime? If things stay the way they are now, I'm pretty sure in a couple hours Mei will be taking our little buddy home and making him a man. Shikamaru sighed as he answered, you'll have to run some interference, do something to stall them. You know Mei, right? Follow them and, casually, bump into them, then make yourself incredibly annoying and don't leave their side. That's something I know you're good at. She looked at him and asked, why do I have to do it? This is your mission, why don't you go down there and stall them? Shikamaru was hoping that she wouldn't ask that question, but she wouldn't be the Tamari that he was infatuated with if she just listened to him without bitching about it. He didn't really know how to answer though. Could you tell your girlfriend of like 2 hours that the previous night another woman had her hands on your balls and threatened to burn them off if you got in her way? That seemed like the sort of information that a relationship needed to be at least 10 hours old to survive, he mentally joked to himself. Whilst simultaneously joking to himself, he also decided to try a new approach with Tamari. He would try and be sweet. He approached her and placed his hand on her cheek and then locked his eyes on her green orbs and said, please Tamari, I really need your help. He lowered his lips to hers and placed a gentle kiss on her lips. He continued, I promise if you do this for me I'll make it up to you. He kissed her again, then trailed kisses up her cheek till he reached her ear, and then he whispered, I'll even go through all the bother of taking you on a real date. She laughed in response and with a grin on her face replied, well, how could I refuse an offer like that? Shikamaru Nara, taking someone on a proper date, I'm just so happy that I get to be the lucky girl. So what are you going to do while I distract them? He shrugged his shoulders and said, I guess I'm going to have to go talk to Lady Tsunade and track down Hinata. Just make sure you don't let the two of them alone for too long. He leaned in and gave her another kiss, this one much longer and deeper than the previous ones had been. He pulled her into a tight embrace and said, thank you so much Tamari. I'm sorry on our first day together we're not going to spend more time as a couple. I want nothing more than to lock ourselves away from the world and spend each second for as long as I can kissing every inch of you. He kissed her again, then groaned as he continued, I guess we should separate, I'll see you as soon as I can. He kissed her one last time and then took off in the direction of the Hokage's office. Tamari sighed as she watched Shikamaru speed off into the distance. He didn't even give her a good idea as to how she was supposed to bother Mei and Naruto. She thought to herself, damn, he really is a lazy, but at least he's one hell of a kisser. She then jumped to the next rooftop following after Mei and Naruto as she started to formulate a plan to break up their little date. Sasuke was seated at the main table inside the Akatsuki's hideout where he had been recovering from his eye surgery. Madara was there discussing strategy, and the newest recruit to the group, Kabuto, was also there listening. Sasuke was barely interested in what Madara was saying, but he was there pretending to listen. Sasuke was still annoyed by the fact that Kabuto had joined them. He had always hated Kabuto when they both worked for Orochimaru, and now he was pissed that the creep was going to be here with the Akatsuki. Zetsu finished his update on the success of Kisami's infiltration into the village hidden in the clouds. Madara said, now since Kisame is focused on acquiring the 8 tails for us, the rest of us should be focused on the 9 tails. Sasuke, seeing as you have such a close relationship with the blonde Jinchuriki, your thoughts would be of great help. I expect the great nations to try and shelter and hide away their remaining tailed beasts, so we need to figure out some way to draw Naruto away from Konoha. What do you think would be the best way to accomplish this, Sasuke? Sasuke's annoyance grew at the mention of his relationship with Naruto. He couldn't understand the unwavering loyalty that Naruto seemed to show him no matter what he did, and that made him angry. He really just wished that Naruto would condemn him like the rest of the world, and that way he could just destroy everything without a second thought. Sasuke looked up at Madara and answered, Naruto is a simple idiot. He is loyal to a fault and would do anything no matter how stupid or against his orders it was to save one of his friends. To draw him out, the best way would be to kidnap one of his friends and leave an obvious trail for him to follow and then spring a trap for him. Kabuto nodded and said, the little interaction I've had with him makes me totally agree with Sasuke's assessment. May I suggest that we take Hinata Hyuga? I have some interesting experiments I'd like to try on a female Byakugan user. Sasuke turned his head with a look of disdain towards Kabuto, then said in an uninterested voice, Hinata's a good enough target, they are close. Naruto would do anything to save her. Madara nodded and said, fine Kabuto and Sasuke, I'll leave acquiring the 9 tails to you two, you guys can figure it out however you want. I'll be leaving with Zetsu to start preparing for the early battles of the 4th Great Shinobi War. I've got my eye on some possible new recruits for the Akatsuki I'd like to secure before the fighting actually starts. Make sure to succeed. Once we secure all 9-tailed beasts, we'll be invincible. Finishing his statement, Madara motioned to Zetsu to follow and the two of them exited. Kabuto turned to Sasuke and gave him a creepy smile as he said, looks like we're teammates. Sasuke got up from the table, totally ignoring Kabuto, and walked out of the room. Sakura knocked on the door to Tsunade's office and heard her older sensei scream, enter. Sakura opened the door and walked into the room to see the blonde Hokage seated at her desk, a glass of sake sitting there. Tsunade said, oh hello Sakura, why are you here today? I really don't think I have the time for more training, not that you need it, you're the best medical ninja I've worked with since Shizune. Sakura smiled and said, thank you Lady Hokage, that's very nice of you, but I actually came here to talk to you about Naruto. Tsunade perked up with interest at the mention of Naruto as she was curious about what news her apprentice could give. Tsunade asked, why do you want to talk about Naruto? Sakura answered, well Lady Hokage, I saw him out around town with the Mizukage, and I was wondering why she was here and interested in Naruto. Tsunade asked, what exactly did you see? Sakura answered, well I was walking around town and I saw the two of them kissing in the middle of the street. I was shocked, she seemed so much older than him, but she said that she kissed him, and that you knew about it. Tsunade was not happy with the news that Naruto was making out with Mei. What the hell was Shikamaru doing? It was his job to stop that from happening. He was normally so very reliable, she would have to chew him out for this most important mission. Sakura continued, I don't understand why you would order Naruto to be with her. Tsunade answered, I did no such thing. This is a very complicated situation, Sakura, but do not worry, I have people dealing with this as we speak. Sakura still looked confused and she asked, but I don't understand, why is the Mizukage kissing Naruto? I just don't get it. Tsunade studied the girl in front of her and was intrigued by her reactions. The relationship between Naruto and Sakura had always seemed to Tsunade very reminiscent of her own with Jiraiya. Naruto would always bug Sakura about dating her and she would always treat him like an annoyance. When it came down to it though, Naruto would do or give anything for Sakura, just like Jiraiya did for her. Tsunade was always so saddened by the loss of Dan she never felt she could open her heart to Jiraiya. More than that though, she needed Jiraiya's friendship. She was always such a screw-up, and all the men in her life always died or left her. She could never give in to Jiraiya because that was the only way she would lose him. But she was wrong, it didn't matter, she lost him anyway, and he died without her ever letting him know how much he meant to her. Tsunade felt a wave of sadness engulf her. She saw Sakura perhaps taking a similar path to her own that has made her this sad and lonely woman. Tsunade decided to try and prod Sakura to confront her feelings towards Naruto rather than hide from them, like she did all of her life. Tsunade asked, why do you care who Naruto is kissing anyway? Sakura answered, well, I'm just worried about him, he's got so much on his shoulders right now, he doesn't need some older woman toying around with him. Tsunade laughed and asked, oh really, are you sure you're not jealous? Sakura looked stunned as she stammered out, what, why would I be jealous? Tsunade smiled at Sakura and said, look Sakura, I know that you are still young and don't really have much figured out. I know that sometimes Naruto can be annoying and childish, and sometimes he can frustrate the hell out of you. I also know that Naruto doesn't fit you little girl fantasies about the handsome prince that you want to marry. But you and I both know that Naruto would go to hell and back for you. You've grown so much in these past years, Sakura, I just don't understand how you can't realize that you will never find someone who would treat you better, or love you more than Naruto. Most women would give anything to have a man like Naruto so devoted to them. Sakura took in the words that she had just heard her sensei say. It hurt her to hear it from someone else. A large part of her has been thinking the same things about Naruto for a long time now, and now to hear it come from the woman who had taught her how to become stronger than Sakura ever dreamed she could be, meant that she couldn't hide from it any longer. She asked, pained confusion saturating her voice, I'm just so scared, sensei. When Sasuke left the village years ago, I felt like my heart was ripped from my chest. I loved him so much even though he never looked at me with anything but annoyance. That rejection hurt for years, but thankfully Naruto was there suffering with me to help me get through it. With Naruto, neither of us knows anything about making love work. What if we screw it up? Or what if after all these years of me blowing him off he doesn't want me anymore? I got through Sasuke leaving me because of Naruto. If I lose him too, I'd be all alone. I just can't risk it, I need him too much. He's the only person I can count on. Tears started to roll down Sakura's face as she confronted her feelings about Naruto, and Tsunade got up from her seat and pulled her young apprentice into a hug. She said in a comforting voice, Sakura, I understand better than anyone the way you feel. Jiraiya was just like Naruto. He bugged me for years and years and I always ignored him, but whenever something terrible happened he was always there to pick up the pieces for me and put a smile on my face. I needed him and counted on him more than anyone in the whole world. Part of me always wanted to give in and be with him heart, body, and soul, but I was just too afraid. All the men I showed my love to always died, so I thought if I never let Jiraiya know what he meant to me I could have him with me forever. But then something even worse happened, Sakura. He died anyway, and he died never knowing what he truly meant to me. Tsunade also started to cry as she continued, I have so many regrets in my life, Sakura. I may be one of the legendary Sannin, but I'm also a legendary. But of all those regrets, the worst one by far is never being with Jiraiya. Not being able to ever see his stupid goofy smile after we kissed. Not being able to feel his warmth next to mine in bed after we made love. Dan was my first real love, but Jiraiya was my soulmate, and it kills me inside every second of every day that he died fighting for me in our village and he never knew how much I loved and appreciated him. Don't be like me, Sakura. Don't lose Naruto because of your own weakness. He looks at you just like Jiraiya always looked at me. If you never let him know for real how important he is to you, those looks will haunt your heart for all of eternity. Sakura looked up at Tsunade, eyes still full of tears, and she said, "Wow, sensei, I never knew you loved Jiraiya that much." Tsunade smiled sadly as she answered, "The saddest thing is that I never knew either, or at least I never could admit it to myself, until after he died. It's too late for me, Sakura, but it's not too late for you. Don't make the same mistakes as me. There's no one who deserves to be loved and appreciated more than Naruto, and you've always meant more to him than anyone in the world, Sakura. The two of you might make each other miserable sometimes, but I know for a fact that if you don't end up together you'll be even more miserable." The master and apprentice broke out of their hug and Sakura asked, "So what do I do, Tsunade?" Tsunade answered, "All you can do is go out there and tell him how you feel. Just be truthful, Sakura, don't try to manipulate him. Open your heart like you did to Sasuke when he left. I know that there is no way Naruto can turn you down. You are the girl who will always hold the dearest spot in his heart." Sakura wiped the tears out of her large green eyes and stiffened up straight as she said, "Thanks, Lady Tsunade. I'm really glad you were here to help me sort out my feelings, for these past years have been so confused about Sasuke and Naruto. But seeing Sasuke this last time, I saw there was nothing left of my friend. I'm not even sure if there was anything there in the first place. I think I might be ready to give Naruto the chance he deserves." "You are right, sensei. Not only would Naruto do anything for me, but he also knows me better than anyone. He could see right through me the last time when I tried to play with his emotions. I feel so bad. I've always relied on him so much, and he's given me all I've ever asked for and so much more. All I've ever done for him is take him for granted and punish him, and he always takes it with a smile and keeps on loving and supporting me. It's time, Lady Hokage. It's time that Naruto gets to be happy. It's time that I look into his hopeful blue eyes and tell him what he deserves to know. That he is the greatest friend and companion anyone could ever hope for, and I want to spend the rest of my life trying to live up to him and make him feel as good as everyone whose life he has ever touched. And I want to let him know the most important thing, that I really do love him." Sakura got a determined look on her face and turned, opening the door and exiting Tsunade's office. Tsunade sighed as she walked over to her personal bar and grabbed the gigantic bottle of vodka that she saved for special occasions. She got a large glass and dropped a few ice cubes in it, then drowned them in vodka, adding only a splash of tonic water and a single slice of lime. She sat back down in her chair and spun it around to look out the window. She took a sip and felt a cool rush followed by the burn of the vodka in her chest, trying to soothe the pain that had lingered in her heart ever since her oldest friend left her alone in the world. She looked out over the village that she loved as she realized that talking to Sakura like that helped alleviate some of her heartache. She very rarely opened up to people, but Sakura was like a daughter to her, and she didn't want someone she cared so much about to suffer from the same burdens that she did. She also felt a little bad about her earlier pep talk to Hinata after sending a third girl after Naruto. She had never meant to meddle in Naruto's love life, but deep down Tsunade had always hoped that her two favorite young leaf shinobi would end up together. She wanted the two of them to live the life of happiness that Jiraiya and she never got to. It really was amazing how much Naruto, Sakura, and Sasuke were like Tsunade and her former teammates in the Sannin. She frowned as the sadness of her own life washed over her. She really hoped with all of her heart that things would turn out right with this war and everything else. She wanted nothing more than to see Naruto and Sakura save the world from Madara and his minions, and then live a long happy life as the Hokage and his wife. Tsunade slurped down the rest of her drink and got up to make another one as she smiled at the picture she had in her mind of Naruto and Sakura's future family.